Chapter 1. The Journey Begins.
My uncle, Ibn Battuta, sat by the window of his house in Tangier. It was the hot time of the day, and his eyes were half open. I went into the room. "Uncle," I said quietly. He looked up at me suddenly.
"Ah, Ahmed, it's you again."
He smiled. "Yes, Uncle," I answered. "Can you tell me today about your journeys, please? I want to travel when I'm older too," I said.
"Is that right?"
he answered. Then he looked carefully at me.
"How old are you now?"
He could remember things from long ago easily, but things from the day before, not very well. "I'm 11, I said.
"Well, perhaps in 4 or 5 years you can begin to travel. But it's not easy, you know. You can see wonderful towns and cities, meet interesting people, and do exciting things. But there are bad times too. You can get ill, meet big hungry animals, or lose all your money."
"No," I said. My eyes were big and open.
"Yes, Ahmed,"
he answered.
"But listen to my stories, and perhaps you too can learn to come home alive."
He laughed.
"Now, where shall I begin?"
I sat down, ready to listen to him. Every time my uncle told his stories, they were different, new, and interesting.
"I was born here in Tangier,"
he began.
"But of course, you know that."
He smiled.
"My father and his father before him were judges. So I learnt to be a judge too. When you're a judge, it's easy to travel. You're important, you see."
"Yes," I said. "Perhaps I can be a judge too one day."
"Perhaps."
He smiled.
"My first journey was a pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca. I got on a donkey and said goodbye to my mother and father in Tangier when I was 21. My mother cried. After some days' journey, I came to the town of Algiers. Here I met more pilgrims, and we travelled to the city of Constantine. I met the rich ruler there. He looked at my dirty old coat, smiled, and gave a beautiful new coat to me.
"Why?" I asked.
"Good men help people when they need it." After some days, I left Constantine with the other pilgrims. We never stopped moving because we were afraid. Perhaps people could take our money from us when we slept, we thought. I was soon ill, and I wanted to go to bed and die. But my friends put me on my old donkey and hit the animal from behind to make it go quickly down the road.
Did you want to come home then, Uncle?
Of course.
He smiled.
But I journeyed to Tunis. A good traveller doesn't stop easily. I left Tunis in a caravan of pilgrims. They asked me, "Can you be the judge in our caravan?" Of course, I said, yes. A caravan judge. Not bad work for a young man. When our caravan arrived in Alexandria, I was excited. I wanted to see the famous Pharos there.
I know, I said quickly. That's a big lighthouse from long ago. Did you go up it?
No,
He laughed.
the Pharos was in ruins. There wasn't a lot to see. But not far from Alexandria, I met a holy man, Burhan ad-Din. He could see into the future. And what did he tell me? You're going to visit India and China. And on your travels, you're going to meet many old friends. I was happy about this. I'm going to go far, I thought.
And did you go to India and China in the end?
Wait and see, Ahmed,
Smiled my uncle.
I arrived in Cairo 8 months after I first left home. What a big city! And what a lot of people! And they never stop running here and there, day and night. And near Cairo, there are the pyramids, big old buildings from the rulers of Egypt long ago.
And were they in ruins? I asked.
No, not the pyramids.
He smiled.
Next, I journeyed up the River Nile. After this, we travelled on camels through the hot desert. There were lots of hungry hyenas there, and at night we needed to be very careful.
Of course, I cried excitedly.
One night, a big hyena came and took everything from my bag.
He said.
But we soon left the desert. Then I travelled to the holy city of Jerusalem and visited the famous buildings there. Next, I went to Damascus. What a beautiful city! Then I travelled to Arabia and visited Medina, and in the end, I arrived in Mecca. After a year and a half, it was wonderful to arrive in the city of my pilgrimage. I learnt from holy men there and prayed for 3 weeks.
And did you come back home then? I asked.
No. Every night I thought of the holy man Burhan ad-Din and of India and China. I was a true traveller now, and I didn't want to stop. So I left Mecca with the ruler of Persia's caravan. When I was young, I heard many stories about the wonderful towns near there. But on my journey, I saw something very different. Years before, the Mongols came to these towns. They killed a lot of people, and I saw many houses in ruins there. Perhaps the most interesting town on that journey was Wasit. A number of men with no money lived there in a big house. In the evening, they prayed and ate their dinner. Then they sat near a big fire and told stories. Suddenly, some of them walked into the fire. Then they ate the fire. One man put a snake's head in his mouth and ate it alive.
And you saw all that? I cried.
Yes.
He laughed.
I visited many interesting towns after that, but I never saw men eat fire and snakes again. Then I went to Baghdad. What a wonderful city. But I was ill there. So I soon went back to Mecca. I learnt from holy men and prayed there for a year, and slowly I felt better.
And what did you do next? I asked.
I travelled by sea for the first time. It was my worst journey,
he said.
You can hear all about it tomorrow.
Chapter 2. From Makkah to Chagatai.
I arrived at my uncle's house early the next morning. So, where did you go on your first sea journey, Uncle? I asked.
Listen and learn,
he said. And then he told me more of his story.
After my first visit to Mecca, I wanted to see more of the world. So I travelled with friends to Jeddah on the Red Sea coast, and we sailed down to Yemen. For 2 days the wind was behind us, but suddenly it changed. The sea can be dangerous, Ahmed. 1 minute it's beautifully quiet, and the next minute it's dark and angry. The wind made our little ship go up and down in the water, and I felt very ill. When we stopped at a village on the coast, my friends and I got off. We finished our journey to the city of Aden by camel. There, we heard stories about a number of famous places in East Africa. So we got on a new ship and sailed down the African coast. Happily, I wasn't ill at all this time. After we visited different East African places, We sailed back to South Arabia some months later. Then we wanted to visit Oman, so we took a ship there. But we got off it early because we didn't like the sailors. This wasn't a good thing to do. I understood that later. My friend and I found a guide to take us on foot to Oman. I had a big bag of expensive clothes with me. So I gave it to the guide, and he carried it. But after some time, the guide suddenly ran away with my bag. I went after him, and I put my knife near his face. That stopped him. You must always look big and angry with bad men, Ahmed. Never forget that. The guide came back, but now I watched him day and night. He wanted to kill us, I think, and take our things. After a week of walking, we arrived in Oman. We were tired, hungry, and thirsty, but happy to be alive. After Oman, I journeyed to the island of Bahrain. I saw young men in little ships there. Some of them weren't any older than you, Ahmed. They stood on the ships, looked down into the sea, and then went far under the water for a very long time. When they came up, they had shells in their hands. They quickly opened the shells with their knives, and what was in them? Wonderful pearls, the biggest and most beautiful pearls in the world. People give a lot of money for them, you know. After Bahrain, I went back to the holy city of Mecca for a year. There, I heard interesting stories about the rich ruler of India. He gave work to judges from different countries, people said. So I looked at different ways to travel to India. In the end, I went across country to Syria and then sailed up to Anatolia. There are sometimes big caravans to India from there, you see. I had a very nice journey across Anatolia. In every village, young men took us to a house for travellers. There they gave us lots of good things to eat and drink. And when we left, all the people of the village cried and said goodbye. I then journeyed north with some new friends. On the mountain roads, something strange happened. One afternoon, there was a lot of snow, and when I looked behind me, I couldn't find my way back to my friends. So I went on my horse to find help. After some time, I came to a dark little house. At the door, I spoke to an old man, but he couldn't understand me. So he called to a younger man. And when I saw him, I knew him. He was an old friend from home. What good luck! He helped me to find my new friends, and we stayed the night at his house. The holy man Burhan ad-Din was right about meeting old friends on my travels. We then journeyed to the Black Sea sailed across it, and travelled to the town of Al-Kiram. This was in green, open country. People called this place the steppe. There, we heard something exciting. The caravan of ruler Khan Uzbeg was only 3 days away. It was a big city with shops, mosques, and places to eat in it, and it moved from place to place. I was interested to meet Khan Uzbeg. He sat on a big chair with his wife by a loon near him. She had a different caravan. We travelled with his caravan, and I learnt about Bayaloon, the daughter of the ruler of Constantinople. She wanted to visit her home city, so Khan Uzbeg asked me, "Can you take her there?" I was very happy to travel with Bayaloon's caravan. After 75 days, we arrived in Constantinople. I stayed for a month and visited all the important places there. Then I began the long journey back to the steppe. It was now winter, a dark and dangerous time for steppe travellers. So I journeyed south to the country of Chagatai and stayed with the ruler there.
My uncle stopped and began to close his eyes. "And did you go to India?" I asked.
That's a story for tomorrow, Ahmed,
he said.
Chapter 3. From Chagatai to Calicut.
When I went back the next afternoon, my uncle was happy to see me.
"Ah, Ahmed, you're here again. Good."
He smiled, and he began his story at once.
For my long winter journey to India, the ruler of Chagatai gave me a warm coat, 2 horses, 2 camels, and lots of money. We travelled south to Samarkand, a city of beautiful buildings and wonderful gardens. From there, we journeyed to the Hindu Kush Mountains. Many people die in the snow in these famous mountains. So we stopped and waited for the bad weather to change. A good traveller always thinks about the weather, Ahmed. When it was better, we got up early one morning and went slowly over the cold and dangerous mountains. There was lots of snow under our feet, and we needed to put down coats for our big camels to walk on. We didn't want them to stop in the snow and die of cold. We were all very happy when the Hindu Kush Mountains were behind us. After 4 long months, we arrived in the north of India. And there I saw something strange. We were on the road one day, when a big animal came out from the trees. It had a fat body, little legs, and a very big head with a dangerous horn on it. The animal ran at my friend's horse, and it hit the horse's leg with its horn. The horse nearly died. I later learnt the name of that strange animal. It was a rhinoceros. We journeyed to the city home of the Sultan of Delhi, Muhammad Tughlaq. I knew a lot about this man before I arrived. He liked judges from different countries. You see, Ahmed, sultans often need people from other countries to help them. I soon learnt more about the Sultan. It is very important to arrive in Delhi with expensive gifts for him. He then gives you back better gifts and lots of money. And in the end, you're richer than before. So I got 30 beautiful horses and 3 camels for the Sultan. Remember that, Ahmed. When you meet a new ruler, always arrive with gifts. When we first came to Delhi, the Sultan was away. But when he heard about me, he made me one of his judges. I was now a rich and important man. I was, of course, excited to meet him when he arrived home. His house was very big, and I needed to walk through door after door to find his room. He sat there on a gold chair with soldiers all about him. He took my hand and spoke warmly to me for some time. The next day, I went by horse with the Sultan and his soldiers through the streets of Delhi. Lots of men on elephants came after us. They left gold money on the road behind them when they went past, and people ran here and there to find it. The Sultan could write beautifully, and he could speak 4 different languages. But he was often angry too. Every day he asked his soldiers to kill people, sometimes for very little things. I needed to be very careful. For 2 years, my work went well. But then, the Sultan began to have trouble with his enemies. One ruler near Delhi fought with him. And what did the Sultan do with his enemy when he found the man? Well, Sultan Muhammad had lots of elephants, and he took some of them and put big knives on their tusks. He then put his enemy in front of the elephants. The animals played with the man. They moved their knives up and down and cut his body open. He died, of course, and it was a very bad thing for us all to watch. I took a wife, a wonderful woman, to live with me in my house in Delhi. But then, my wife's father began to fight with the Sultan. This wasn't good, because people began to speak badly about me. Perhaps I was an enemy of the Sultan too, they said. Then something worse happened. A famous holy man, Sheikh Shihab ad-Din, lived on a hill near Delhi. I was very interested in him, and I sometimes visited his home. But Sultan Muhammad was very angry with Sheikh Shihab ad-Din. He asked the holy man to do many different things, but Sheikh Shihab always said no to him. So in the end, the Sultan's men went and killed the holy man. And when the Sultan asked about the holy man's friends, people gave my name to him. Is Sultan Muhammad going to be angry with me? I thought. What can I do? I can't run away from him, because then his soldiers are going to come and kill me too. I was very afraid. I stopped eating and drank only water. In the end, I left Delhi and stayed with a different holy man for 5 months. I gave away all my expensive things and beautiful clothes, and I prayed from morning to night. Then, one day, the Sultan's soldiers came to visit me with horses and new clothes. "The Sultan wants to see you," they said. I put on my new clothes, went back to Delhi, and sat before the Sultan.
Ibn Battuta, you're going to be my man in China.
He smiled.
I have 15 Chinese visitors here. Go back to China with them and take gifts from me for their ruler.
I couldn't say no to the Sultan, and of course I wanted to see China. But very importantly, I could now leave the Sultan and stay alive. So I said yes at once. I left Delhi in a big caravan with gifts for the ruler of China, lots of horses and big bags of gold. My wife and young daughter came with me too. We had 1,000 of the Sultan's best soldiers with us. That was good, because 4 days later we met 4,000 of the Sultan's enemies. We fought and killed them all, but I soon had more trouble. One afternoon, I went for a walk in the mountains far from the caravan. Suddenly, 40 bandits came out from behind some rocks. They wanted to take all my expensive clothes from me, and to kill me too. Of course, I didn't want to die, so I told them lots of good stories, and I gave them all my clothes. In the morning, I was a free man, but I had nothing to wear, only my trousers. For days, I walked in the mountains with nobody to help me. From time to time, I saw more bandits, but I went quickly behind rocks and trees, and they didn't see me. In the end, I was tired, cold, and hungry. One day, a good traveller found me, and he carried me to the next village. I had the best dinner in the world there, and it was wonderful to put on warm clothes too. 2 days later, I found the caravan again. My wife and young daughter were very happy to see me. We journeyed to the town of Cambay and carried all our beautiful gifts onto 4 ships. Then we sailed south to Calicut and put everything on 3 big Chinese ships there. I went to the mosque that afternoon and prayed for a good journey. But before I got on the ship, something very bad happened. The weather suddenly changed, and the wind broke 2 of our ships on rocks by the coast. We lost everything: the gifts, the people, and the animals. The 3rd ship, with my wife and daughter on it, sailed away, and I never saw it or them again. I needed to go back to the Sultan and tell him about all this, but I was afraid. When the Sultan was angry, he often killed people.
So, did you go back to Delhi, Uncle? I asked.
You can hear about that tomorrow, Ahmed.
He smiled.
Chapter 4. From the Maldives to China.
My uncle didn't answer his door at once the next day, so I waited in the street, and I thought about the Sultan of Delhi. In my head, I could see his big, angry face when he heard all about those 3 ships. Just then, my uncle opened the door.
Ah! Hello, Ahmed. Come in and sit down,
he said. And then he began his story again.
Of course, I couldn't go back to the Sultan. That was dangerous. I needed to leave India at once, I knew. Then I remembered the holy man Burhan ad-Din's words about visiting China. Perhaps I could go there alone, without the Sultan's help. First, I sailed to the Maldives. They are truly wonderful islands, and there are about 2,000 of them. The Maldives are famous for their beautiful shells. The people there don't have gold money. For them, shells are money. I stayed on the island of Male. I wanted only to visit the place, but the rulers there needed a new judge. When I arrived, they brought gifts of gold and pearls to my house. It wasn't easy for me to leave the island after that. So I had new work to do. I was the judge on Male. At first, everything went well. I took a wife from an important family, and I did my usual work. But I soon began to have enemies. I was a rich man, and people didn't like that. So they said bad things about me. After 9 months, it was time to sail away. My wife wasn't a good sea traveller, so I left her behind on the island. You sometimes need to leave a place quickly, Ahmed, before things go badly wrong. I left for China, but first I sailed to the island of Serendib. When we were 9 days away from it, we could see its famous mountain, Adam's Mountain, across the sea. Many people make the pilgrimage to this holy mountain because on it you can see a footprint of Adam, the first man in our world. I stayed with the Sultan of Serendib for 3 days. He loved listening to my traveller's stories, and he gave me pearls and big rubies. Serendib is famous for its rubies, you see. The women there wear them all over their arms and legs. The Sultan told me all about Adam's Mountain. There are 2 ways to walk up to Adam's footprint, an easy way and a dangerous way. You're a true pilgrim only when you go the dangerous way. So, of course, I went up that way. It was a long journey over big rocks and between dark trees. But we arrived in the end at Adam's footprint. It was wonderful there. You're up in the sky, and you can see things very far away. After that, I left Serendib by ship for India. I was a happy man, with lots of pearls and rubies in my bag. But soon, things went wrong. One day, sudden winds took our ship onto some rocks. I was afraid, because I can't swim. The sailors took some of the women travellers away, but I stayed alone all night on the ship and prayed. In the morning, some people found me and took me back to the coast of Serendib. I sailed away once more, but this time lots of pirates came onto our ship. They took all my pearls, rubies, and expensive clothes, and then left me on an island in only my trousers. Not again, I thought. I sailed back to the Maldives once more, and there I got on a ship to China. On the journey, I stopped at a number of places and visited 2 islands, Sumatra and Java. Java was very interesting. Everybody there has an elephant, and people visit the shops on them. After Java, we sailed for 40 days with a good wind behind us and arrived in China. There's a lot to tell you about China, Ahmed. Chinese people can make many different things very well, from wonderful pictures to beautiful boxes. China is a very nice country for travellers, and I journeyed easily from town to town. Some of their animals are different from our animals too, and that interested me. They have cats with blue-green eyes, you know. And when I stopped in one city called Fuzhou, something very interesting happened. A judge arrived in the city, and my friends took me to meet him. We said hello, and then this man looked at me, and I looked at him. "I know you," I cried. "You're al-Bushri, and you're from Ceuta, not far from my hometown of Tangier."
That's right,
he smiled. We laughed and talked for hours. You meet people in the strangest places, Ahmed. The holy man, Burhan al-Din, was right again about finding old friends on my journeys. After some months in China, I was ready to begin my long journey home. So, I went to look for a ship.
And did you come home at once? I asked.
No,
he said.
I stopped at cities from my earlier journeys, Damascus, Cairo, and many more. But when I went back, they were dark and different places,
he said slowly.
I can tell you all about that tomorrow.
Chapter 5. To Tangier and Granada.
So, what was the trouble with those cities when you visited them again? I asked my uncle when I arrived the next day.
Let's talk about my journey from China first,
he answered quietly.
On my way back from China, I stopped in Sumatra again. Then I got on a big ship and sailed for 40 days to India. When I arrived there, I thought about visiting the Sultan, but I was afraid. Perhaps he remembered his gifts for the ruler of China and the time when I lost them all. From India, I sailed to the south coast of Arabia. I then travelled through Persia to Baghdad. I journeyed across the desert, and in the end, I arrived once more in the city of Damascus. It was 20 years from the time of my last visit, but I remembered it well. In Damascus, I heard something interesting. A teacher from Tangier now lived and worked in the city. I was excited to meet this man, and I asked him at once for news from home. My father was dead, but my mother was alive, he told me. I felt bad about my father. And suddenly, after 24 long years away, I began to think of going back home and of seeing my mother. I journeyed to Aleppo, but there I heard some bad news. The plague wasn't far away, and many people were ill with it. At first, I travelled quickly from city to city in Syria. I wanted to stay in front of the plague, you see. But after a time, when I arrived in new places, the plague was there before me. So I went back to Damascus. Here I learnt the worst. At that time, Lots of men, women, and children died of plague there every day. Everybody came out into the streets with their holy books and prayed for their families, but nobody could stop the plague. The news of the plague made me think of my mother again. Was she ill too, perhaps? So I travelled on pilgrimage to Mecca one more time, and then began my way back home through Cairo. Of course, I knew this wonderful city from years before, but it was very different now. 21,000 people died from the plague there every day.
My uncle stopped and looked out of the window. "Did you get ill, Uncle?" I asked.
No, I didn't,
he said slowly.
And I thank God for that. I left Cairo, travelled to Tunis, and then got on a ship to the island of Sardinia. We didn't stay there long. There were bandits on the island, and they wanted to fight and kill us. So we left quickly. After Sardinia, I sailed to North Africa, and then travelled by donkey to Tangier. But not long before I arrived home, I heard bad news about my mother. She was dead, people in the town of Taza told me. I was very sorry to hear this. In the end, I went to the most important city in our country, Fez, and I met our ruler, Sultan Abu Inan, there. To me, he was more wonderful than all the rulers in the world. Sometimes, Ahmed, the things in your home country are the best. After that, I went back to Tangier and visited my mother's grave. I was ill for 3 months. But then I heard my friends talk about trouble in the kingdom of Granada, Al-Andalus.
King Alfonso of Castile is going to fight our brothers there,
they said.
We must help them.
Soon after that, we sailed to the kingdom of Granada. But King Alfonso died of the plague before we arrived, and we didn't need to fight. So I stayed and visited all the interesting places in that country. Now, I must tell you a story about my time there. One day, I was on the coast road to Malaga when I met 12 soldiers on horses. They asked me to journey with them because the road to Malaga was dangerous. There were enemy ships near the coast. I wanted to go with them, but in the end, I stayed behind and travelled with my friends. Later, on the road to Malaga, we found a dead horse in our way. It was one of the 12 soldiers' horses, and I soon learnt their story. Those soldiers were now in the hands of dangerous enemy sailors, but I was free. I thanked God for that, and I prayed for all of our brothers. Then I journeyed to the famous city of Granada. In one of the beautiful gardens there, I met some writers. They were interested in my traveller's stories, and one young man, Ibn Juzai, listened carefully and began to write about my long journey. I didn't know it at the time, but Ibn Juzai was later a very important friend to me. Soon after that, I left the kingdom of Granada and sailed back to Morocco.
And this time you stayed at home in our country. Is that right, Uncle? I said.
Well, no,
He smiled.
I didn't. There was one more country to visit, a place of hot deserts and dangerous snakes. Come back to hear about that tomorrow morning, Ahmed.
Chapter 6. To Mali and back.
When I arrived the next day, my uncle said,
Ahmed, you wanted to be a traveller before. Do you want to be a traveller now?
Yes, I answered. It's not easy, I know, but I truly want to travel.
Good,
He said.
so listen carefully, because there's more to learn. For my last journey, I travelled south because I wanted to visit Mali. You see, years before, in Cairo, I heard many stories about the famous king of Mali, Mansa Suleiman, and all his gold. So I left Fez and journeyed across the Atlas Mountains to the town of Sijil Massa. Now, do you remember I met a man called Al-Bushri in China? Well, in Sijil Massa, I met Al-Bushri's brother. It was strange. The two brothers were in very different places, but I met the older one and the younger one. Then I travelled by camel with a caravan to Taghaza. It wasn't a beautiful village, but it had some interesting buildings. The people there take big pieces of salt from the desert and make houses with them. There's a salt mosque there, too. I stayed in a little salt house in the village, but the water there was very bad to drink. So after 10 days, we left and began our long and dangerous journey south across the hot desert. At first, a friend and I left our caravan every morning to look for things to eat for our camels. But one day we heard some bad news. Ibn Ziri, a man from our caravan, walked alone into the desert with no water bottle. Later, friends found him dead under a tree. After that, we always stayed with the caravan. You must never go alone into the desert, Ahmed. You can easily forget your way and die quickly in the hot sun. There were lots of big snakes in this desert too, and one man in the caravan liked playing with them. What happened to him? A snake put its teeth into one of his fingers one morning, and he nearly died. In the end, with a knife, he cut this finger from his hand, and so he lived. Remember, playing with snakes is very dangerous. We journeyed for many weeks to the biggest city in Mali to meet King Mansa Suleiman. But soon after we arrived, I ate something bad, and I was ill for a long time. Usually, when you're an important traveller, the ruler takes expensive gifts to you when you first arrive in a town. So I waited in my bed day after day for Mansa Suleiman's men to visit me. After some weeks, the king's men arrived with gifts. Perhaps it was some nice clothes or some pieces of gold, I thought. But no. They gave me some old bread and meat. When I felt better, I visited the king's beautiful house every day. I waited for more gifts, but I got nothing. In the end, I spoke to the king. I'm a world traveller. In every country, rulers give me wonderful gifts when I arrive. I arrived in your city 4 months ago, but you do not speak to me or give me nice things. What can I say about you to other people? Things soon changed after that. Mansa Suleiman was now very good to me, and he gave me a house and a lot of gold. And when I left the city with a friend to visit the country, his men brought me more gold. In the end, my friend and I came to a big river. I saw some very strange animals in the water there. Horses with big fat bodies, little legs, and elephants' feet. My friend called them hippopotamuses, but they were new to me. I travelled north to Timbuktu, but in a town near Timbuktu, I was very ill once more. Then one day, I got a letter from the Sultan of Morocco. He needed me at once. What does he want? I thought. We travelled north for a long time and went back over the Atlas Mountains. The winter snow there made the roads very dangerous, and we journeyed slowly. In the end, after some months, I arrived back at the Sultan's home in Fez.
I have important work for you,
he said when he saw me.
There's a young writer here. His name is Ibn Juzai, and he wants to write down all your stories. Then everybody can learn about them.
Ibn Juzai, I said at once. I know him. I met him in Granada. A holy man once told me about meeting friends in different places. It happened before, and now it's happening again. Of course, it was wonderful to speak to Ibn Juzai again. I told him all about the exciting places, the different animals, and the interesting people from all my journeys. And now, Ahmed, all these stories are in a book. I'm not going to be here always. But take this. It's my gift to you. You can read it and learn more about my travels when you want.
With that, my uncle put a big book into my hand. "Thank you, Uncle," I said. I took the book home with me that afternoon. My uncle died not long after that. But I have his book, and I often read it to this day.